1/1 minions are the weakest minions that can still attack in Hearthstone and are generally underrated, but have enough of them and they can really work towards winning the game. In this list we'll be talking about the best cards in the game which can summon a 1/1 minion. And at number 10 we have the Haunted Creeper. Haunted Creeper is a 2-mana 1/2 beast which summons 2 1/1 tribalist spiders when it dies, and came out in the first expansion of Hearthstone. Many veteran players will probably remember this card because it was basically a staple, must-run 2-drop during the first couple of years of the game. And at first, Creeper really may not look that great, especially since it just dies to any normal 2-mana 2/3 or 3/2 minion. But when you add up its stats, Creeper can potentially be a 2-mana 3/4, which at the time were good stats even for a 3-drop. Haunted Creeper's true power though laid in its stickiness, which is a term Hearthstone players use to describe how hard it is to completely remove all the part of a card from the battlefield. Pretty much no 1-drop or 2-drops could completely kill all parts of the spider without dying itself or investing at least 3 attacks into it. And when most aggro mid-range decks want to stay on the board for as long as possible, it's pretty clear to see why Creeper hung around in the meta for so long. There were almost too many early decks that ran this thing, from Token Paladin to Hobgoblin Zoolock to Beast Druids. But by far the most dominant deck this card has been in was Token Druid, which abused Druid's amazing board-wide buffs and protection spells to create a threatening swarm of minions that could also spawn a new wave of minions when they all died. This deck, more than pretty much every other deck in the game, needed to stay on the board to win, and used tons of cards that either swarmed the board or protected the board you had. Mark of the Lotus pretty much single-handedly made this deck very competitive, and got better the more minions you had on board. So Creeper either deterred your opponent from using board clears, or helped to push damage faster if it did die. Even now, it's not even that bad of a 2-drop in casual decks, especially because of how well parts of it can stick around even until turn 5. But it deserves the number 10 spot on this list because of how little it's been played and more powerful in recent formats. And at number 9, we have Dr. Boom. This neutral 7-mana 7/7 legendary minion, when played, summons 2 1/1 Boombots, which randomly deal between 1 to 4 damage to an enemy when destroyed. This card, for as simple and weak as it first seems, was another absolute monster in early Hearthstone, and pretty much warped the first couple of years worth of metas around it. And at time, there were pretty much 3 staple cards that any self-respecting deck needed to include: Sylvanas, Ragnaros, and Dr. Boom. So, why was it so good back then? For one, the game was a lot slower back then, with a heavy focus on squeezing as much value as you could out of your cards, even in aggro decks. People were almost never being killed by turn 6, and combo and aggro cards didn't really start being degenerately good until years later. Stats were very important, and Dr. Boom was by far the best value you could get for 7 mana. In addition to a 7/7 body that could trade into 2 to 3 other minions, Boom could go face for a lot of damage, and his Boombots could easily kill other minions for free, or eke out just enough damage to kill your opponent. You see, because the Boombots can randomly target any enemy when they died, that meant they had the potential to go face for 8 damage, kill any enemy minion at 4 or less health, or do basically nothing. But because Dr. Boom was so immediately threatening, and his bots had the potential to instantly win the game with enough luck, he could usually go for 3 for 1 in card advantage. Running Big Game Hunter became a necessary staple just to counter Boom in Ragnaros, but even then, the Boombots still had a chance to get a lucky bomb off and even out the tempo lost. Eventually, he started getting called Dr. 7 because he would usually win the game if played on 7 mana. And even though he got his own hero, alternative card, and expansion centered around him, Dr. Boom never really took off in Wild because of how he isn't really immediately impactful when played, which is why he's only at the number 9 spot on this list. And at number 8, we have Tour Guide. This 1-mana 1/1 has the effect when played where your hero's next power will cost 0 mana. And as a side note, his hero power cost reduction remains even after your turn ends, so you can hold on to the mana cost reduction until you need it. This inclusion may confuse some of you because for one, this card doesn't seem to be able to summon a 1/1 at all. And for many veterans, this card is crazy good and should deserve to be much, much higher on this list. But if you're playing as a paladin, Tour Guide can absolutely make your next hero power cost 0 and let you summon a 1/1 Silverhand recruit. So for that reason, we'll only be evaluating how good Tour Guide has been only when his battle cry is used to summon a 1/1. And honestly, a baseline 1-mana 1/1 that summons another 1/1 has historically been quite good. They can be used to trade cleanly into 1 other health minions or even take down some 2-drops. But where Tour Guide really shined was in Wild Odd Paladin, which basically tried to summon as many Silverhand recruits as possible with a hero power. Dude Paladin isn't exactly a new deck, but was especially good in Wild with how many good Paladin buffs had been printed over the years. Odd Paladin was a consistent meta threat, and was able to win by overwhelming their opponent with Silverhand recruits, or by draining their opponent of resources by spamming their insanely good upgraded hero power. So where did Tour Guide fit into all of this? Well, if you're playing as an odd paladin, Tour Guide on 1 and hero powering effectively gives you 3 1/1s for 1 mana, which is still one of the best 1 mana plays you can make in the game. And to the fact that literally every card synergizes with summoning Silverhand recruits, and it's easy to see why Tour Guide was pretty darn good in Odd Paladin. And at number 7, we have Muster for Battle. This 3 mana paladin spell summons 3 1/1 Silverhand recruits and equips a vanilla 1/4 weapon to your hero. This card was another paladin staple when it first came out. Muster, as it was called, was one of the best turn 3 plays in the game at the time because it immediately created a wide board and gave your hero a 1 attack weapon to immediately attack with. Usually in Hearthstone, when you cluster or add flexibility with 2 effects, the power level of the card goes down. Muster was one of the first cards ever printed to not have this problem, and was played extensively because of it. 3 recruits for 3 mana was a pretty fair deal, but add on to that a free 1 mana weapon, and you basically are generating free mana every time you play this card. It's worth noting that Light's Justice, the 1 mana 1/4 weapon Muster for Battle equips, is actually a collectible card, but it's never really played for how weak it is on its own. And unlike the first 2 entries on this list that were staples in the early years of Hearthstone, Muster continued to see play for much longer. The first real degenerate deck this card was in was Secret Paladin, which basically aimed to play the best, most efficient Paladin cards to beat their opponent out with tempo, eventually closing out games with Mysterious Challenger, which would consistently pull 5 mana worth of secrets directly from your deck. Muster perfectly complemented this game style, using the dudes and weapon to perfectly trade into enemy minions to continue snowballing and winning the game. And just like the previous entry in this list, it was also part of the core Odd Paladin deck list that dominated WoW for quite a long time. Summoning 3 recruits really was the icing on the cake since a lot of their finishers got much better when buffing recruits instead of normal minions. And when you consider how old this card is, it makes it all the more impressive that Muster continues to see some niche play, even to this day. And at number 6, we have Living Roots. This 1 mana druid spell gives you the option of summoning 2 1/1s or dealing 2 damage to any target. And for as simple as this card looks, what really made this card really perform is how good both choose 1 options are for just 1 mana. For one, the ability to deal 2 damage to any target for just 1 mana has historically been pretty good as removal, and as a cheap damaging spell to use in a 1-turn kill or OTK combos. Whether it was with Theresian, Kel'Thas, or Avionicon, all of these combos were abused using Malygos and throwing 5 to 6 cheap spells at your opponent's face for an OTK. Nowadays though, traditional pure damage OTKs are less common than other ones, mainly because of how slow they are and how relatively easy they are to play around. Living Roots really found success with its other choice, since being able to summon 2 1/1s was super valuable in Druid. This card, unlike Haunted Creeper, was a staple in every version of Aggro Token Druid, which has been a consistent meta threat in Wild. It even was one of the better turn 1 plays in the deck too, which is surprising considering how nearly half the deck was just 1 mana cards. Other than providing 2/2 worth of stats for just 1 mana, it also synergized with the Broken Mark of the Lotus, and could help close out games quickly with Savage Roar. This card was the perfect token card, and even gave you the option of dealing 2 damage to any target to kill a taunt minion, or do a little bit of burst damage. Unfortunately, Roots could have been higher on this list if it weren't for how much more widespread and currently played the next cards in this list are. And speaking of which, at number 5, we have Adorable Infestation. This 1 mana hunter and druid spell requires you to buff a minion by +1/+1 to summon a 1/1 beast, and add another 1/1 beast to your hand. If you want to talk about efficient effect packaging, this card is the definition of it. Adorable Infestation is really insane and has a lot of uses as a 1 mana card. You could buff your 1-drop on turn 1 to trade into your opponent's 2-drop while also getting a 1/1. You could save the extra beast in your hand to play it for 1 mana for more board presence. You could use it for its various beast and spell synergies. And just like this card's spin-off of, it provides way too much tempo and value at its mana cost. And to top it all off, being a dual class card means the Adorable Infestation saw plenty of play in 2 different classes. Probably the most common use of this card has been in aggro and mid-range decks in Standard, which loved the early game tempo provided in synergy with Kalkar Pack Runner. One of the funnier competitive decks Adorable Infestation was included in was Penflinger Hunter. Back when he could target heroes, Penflinger was a card that dealt 1 damage and returned itself to your hand whenever you played a spell. So, what you would do is play as many spells as possible while spamming Penflinger damage at your opponent's face. It also has been great in Beast Druid, which aimed to rush out cheap copies of Frostsaber Matriarch and Umbral Owl by summoning beast and playing spells. Luckily, Infestation double dipped and was, again, one of the best early card games you can play in that deck. And despite being a fairly new card, Adorable Infestation has quickly found itself becoming a Druid and Hunter staple in both Standard and Wild. And at number 4, we have Bees. This 3-mana Druid spell summons 4 1/1 bees and forces them to attack a minion. It's worth noting this card needs to target a minion to be playable, can't target nothing, and summons 4 1/1 bees, needs at least 4 board spaces to summon all the bees, and makes the bees stop attacking the minion if it dies before all of them can attack. So, if you're playing this targeting an enemy 3/2, assuming you have enough board space, it will basically deal 2 damage and leave you with 2 1/1s. Some of you may be wondering why this card is so high on this list, especially when you consider how every combination of damage and 1/1 summoning is really kind of mediocre. During its rotation in Standard, it was played a decent amount because of just how little cheap removal Druid had at the time, and how weak the format was. But in Wild, this card helped to make a very strong off-meta combo deck. The deck was Linecracker Druid, and the combo ultimately resulted in your hero being nearly unkillable. Basically, while abusing Druid's myriad of mana discount options and ramp, on the combo turn you would play Linecracker, which doubles its attack every time it kills a minion, play bees into your own Linecracker, as you can attack your own minions with this card's effect, killing 4 bees in the process, and finally playing Earthen Scales to gain armor equal to Linecracker's attack. This could net you a cool 2500 armor if done enough times. And while it is a lot, you may be asking, is it really enough to make you invincible? Hearthstone has a built-in turn limit of 50 turns, and considering this combo is executed by turn 20, it forces your opponent to deal an insane amount of damage per turn until the turn limit, all while making them figure out a way to avoid running out of cards and dying to fatigue damage. Linecracker Druid, of course, always runs a copy of Jade Isle, which lets them shuffle extra copies into your deck to avoid fatigue damage and letting you summon bigger and bigger threats. Bees essentially enabled this anti-meta combo deck to work and destroyed any slow value or combo decks in Wild for a while. And at number 3, we have Wound Prey. This 1-mana Hunter card lets you deal 1 damage to any character and summons a 1/1 beast with Rush, a keyword which lets it immediately attack enemy minions. Honestly, this card is pretty trash on its own, and isn't really worth playing in a vacuum. Hearthstone, of course, is a game centered around synergies and card combos, and comfortably found a home in all versions of Questline Hunter, both in Standard and Wild. The questline basically requires you to play 6 spells that deal damage and changes your hero power to cost 0 mana, and be able to target minions. It also rewarded you with Tavish, which is a 5-mana 7/7 that permanently makes every spell you play refresh your hero power. So basically, the game plan would be to play as many spells that did damage as possible, play Tavish, machine gun your opponent down with a hero power that refreshed every turn you played a spell. Add in some card draw spells, and it's pretty easy to deal more than 30 damage in a couple of turns, even in Standard. The only thing that didn't make this deck more degenerate than it already has been is how few good Hunter spells there are that do damage. You see, there really are only a couple handful of good damage spells in Standard, and just a couple more powerful ones in Wild, meaning you can't make a full damaging spell deck. Wound Prey, as well as its weaker version On the Hunt, were excellent since they both synergize with the questline, were odd-costed cards so they work with Baku, and actually summon beasts which could make Kill Command deal extra damage. It's hard to express how much random burst damage this deck could do between Rapid Fire and Tracking, all while weaving in free 3 damage hero powers. Since then, Wound Prey has also been included in some Standard Face Hunters as a slightly better Elven Archer, but its strength ultimately depended on however good Questline Hunter has been, which has been really good. And at number 2, we have Snip Snap. This neutral legendary mech is a 2-mana 2/3 that summons 2 1/1 mechs when it dies, and it has 2 somewhat obscure keywords. The first one is Magnetic, which gives it the option to attach itself to another mech by adding its stats and keywords to it. The second one is Echo, which lets you play a card multiple times in one turn by adding a repeatable ghost copy to your hand that disappears at the end of your turn. Essentially, the idea behind this card is flexibility, letting you play 1, 2, or 3 copies of Snip Snap during your turn, either playing them as normal minions or as mech buffs. The card has seen a fair share of inclusions in mech decks, Reno decks, and even some Zoo decks, but it really wasn't an issue in those decks. No, what made this card broken was a 5-mana 3-card combo that let you gain infinite stats in one turn. Basically, all you would do is play cards like Mech Warper, Corpse Widow, and Summoning Portal, then Mech Warper, which now costs 0 mana, and finally as many repeatable copies of Snip Snap before your turn timer ended. And if you had just one mech on board that could attack, you could attach all of your infinite copies of Snip Snap into it and just attack your opponent directly with infinite damage. The combo was pretty absurd, and with all the good card draw options Warlock had, it really wasn't that hard to pull off the combo consistently by turn 5. Of course, Blizzard had to nerf this S tier deck by making it so that all echo copies can't cost less than 1 mana, meaning you could no longer get free, infinite copies of Snip Snap. But if it weren't for how dominant and ubiquitous the next card on this list has been throughout all of Hearthstone's existence, Snip Snap could have definitely been at the top of this list for how broken of a deck it helped make. And at number 1, we have Leroy Jenkins. This 4 mana 6/2 neutral legendary minion summons 2 1/1 dragons for your opponent and has charge, a keyword which lets minions attack immediately when played. This legendary WoW card is on here for a good reason, because it basically gave every class a better fireball before it was nerfed. Charge has been Hearthstone's most controversial keyword, because it created uninteractive scenarios where your opponent could just push face damage without you being able to do anything about it. By far, the worst example of this was during Alpha, where you could easily pull off a 20 damage combo by playing Leroy, Power Overwhelming, Faceless, and going face with 2 giant Leroys. The 1/1 summons by Leroy were meant to balance the card by being able to kill Leroy for free after you played him, but this downside doesn't matter in 99% of cases. Even after being nerfed to cost 5 mana, basically every single aggro deck still tried to find a way to fit him in whenever he was in the format. And for those not familiar with Hearthstone, it may seem like 5 mana to deal 6 damage may not seem that great. But aggro matchups very often come down to just a single mana and health point mattering. Leroy is also the perfect cost for most aggro decks, being playable when the game is about to end, while also having the most efficient, aggressive burst damage potential of a neutral card. Even now, Leroy has seen playing versions of the best, most aggressive aggro decks of all time. It didn't matter if the deck was Pirate Warrior, Aggro Shaman, Odd Demon Hunter, or even Zoolock, pretty much every deck that had an aggressive tilt wanted a strong, reliable finisher, and Leroy was the man. This chicken-eating paladin definitely deserves the number 1 spot on this list for how consistently powerful he's been in most metas ever since Alpha. Alright, and that's the list. If you think we missed any other cards that should have definitely been on the list, or have ideas for future videos just like this one, let us know down in the comments.